Hello and welcome. I'm Becky with Malvern Books, and we're very happy to be with you this evening as we celebrate the launch of Brian Phillip Whalen's new book, Semiotic Love Stories. Joining Brian tonight will be Richard Santos and Amy Long. Following the readings, we will have an audience Q&A, so if you'd like to ask our authors a question, please type that in the chat. We will have the authors' books available at Malvern Books, so you can give us a call at 512-322-2097, and we'll be happy to sell those to you. First up, we'll hear from Richard Santos. Richard's debut novel, Trust Me, was published in March 2020. He is the executive director of Austin Batcave, an organization that provides creative writing workshops to students in under-resourced areas. He is a board member of the National Book Critics Circle. Recent work can be found in Texas Monthly, Oust Press, Kirkus Reviews, Crime Reads, Salt Hill, and many more. In a previous career, he worked for some of the nation's top political campaigns, consulting firms, and labor unions. Richard?
Thank you, Becky, and thank you, Joe and Malvern. I hope everyone orders Brian's book from Malvern. Congratulations on the book. I'm excited to be here. I am going to read not from my novel, which you can buy from Malvern, but I'm going to read an essay that was published on Oust Press's website in August. And I would say that even though this essay was published in August, the effects of it are still, they've diminished, but it's still something that I'm going through. All right, here we go. That makes it sound a lot more serious than it is, but that's all right. The first 9 months of quarantine, I inhaled media like a junkie in the old Union Square, the kind of gritty 70s movies I love so much. Cuatlicue Girl by Gris Munoz, The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones, Survivor's Song by Paul Tremblay, Made in Saturn by Rita Indiana, The Lost Book of Adana Moreau by Michael Zapata, A Silent Fury by Yuri Herrera, Tigers Not Daughters by Samantha Mabry, Zero Saints by Gavino Iglesias, Ghost Wall by Sarah Moss, the Oedipus trilogy with my high school seniors, one of whom reacted to the death of Antigone while zooming in from a job at the grocery store, and many more. Over those first few months, I read War and Peace with the literary journal A Public Space's Twitter read-along. I now get to be that guy at the Zoom party spending all night trying to bend the conversation so that I can casually drop that tidbit. I started reading a book by a psychiatrist who claims that demonic possession is real, but I stopped reading that book after I received a phone call from a person who asked to speak with someone with the exact same name as that author. I'm not going to list all the comic books I read those first few months of quarantine, but here's some highlights. Assorted X-Men comics, old and new, Cosmic Ghost Rider, Sebastian O, Black Hammer, Vampire Tales, Morbius, the Living Vampire, Menace, Marvel Mystery Comics, Fear, Tales of Suspense, and The Black Ghost by Alex Segura. I approached the wealth of the Criterion Channel by going straight to the movies expiring every month and ticking through as many as I can before they disappear forever, or at least show up on Amazon Prime for $3.99. I burned through 10 film noirs on the Criterion Channel's background noise while working, cleaning, or playing with my daughter. For a whole week, my day's audio soundtrack was dramatic strings, gunshots, and the shrill cries of mid-century American white men, unsure how to navigate the post-war world that still held them far above everyone else, but just a teeny notch below where they were before the war. I watched the first 3 Hellraiser movies and called it research for a writing project. The third one is actually better than the second one. I watched the only film Saul Bass directed. It's about really smart ants. I watched the original Westworld and even Future World, the sequel, which did nothing but make me 100% confident that Josh Brolin would have been awesome to hang out with in the 70s, but Peter Fonda would have been the worst. I watched 3 seasons of Better Call Saul in 4 days. I'm on the 3rd season of Ozark, even though I'm still not sure I like the show. I've watched a season of Star Trek Deep Space Nine and a season of Cheers, which doesn't sound like much, but it's impressive when you remember that network shows used to deliver 25 plus episodes a season. I've watched 2 seasons of Absolutely Fabulous, which sounds impressive until you realize the British know that sometimes 6 episodes is all you really need. I watched season 3 of The Expanse, but can't finish season 4 because the little progress bar in the menu shows me the exact spot on the exact episode that my mother reached before she died last May. While going on walks, I strap my 1-year-old to my chest and slip a little speaker in my pocket so we can listen to podcasts. We've listened to the Ballad of Billy Balls, the left-right game, Son of a Hitman, Hunting Warhead, Someone Knows Something, You Must Remember This, The Plot Thickens, The Winds of Change, and countless episodes of Uncover, Gone, Unexplained Mysteries, Men in Blazers, The Magnus Project, In Our Time, and many more. We walk through the neighborhood, the sound waves behind us like a wake. It must be really annoying. I've forgotten lots of titles. I'm forgetting whole movies and entire books that I read electronically, which is all to say that I burned myself out. For the past month or so, I can't finish anything. I'm still halfway through that demon book, All God's Children by Aaron Gwynn, The Turn of the Screw by Henry James, and Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell. I love the first half of Da 5 Bloods, but haven't finished it. I'm 3 episodes into season 2 of Homecoming. At night, I read 2 pages of a Silver Surfer issue from the 70s, and then read half of a Fantastic Four from the 60s, then do part of a crossword puzzle or Sudoku lately on my phone, and then go to sleep. Even my 1-year-old daughter, who loves flipping pages of her board books, reaches down and turns the page before I can read all the words. We finished the Pout-Pout Fish in about 2 minutes. Entertainment used to be an escape. Now it's an expectation. And like with everything else we take for granted, I've grown resentful of both its presence and its absence. If I don't have a podcast playing in the nursery or a movie in the living room, or if I'm not scrolling through the endless menus of the endless apps on our Roku, then I feel a kernel of anxiety in my gut bloom into something large and angry. The stock market podcasts I listen to, it's not worth going into, say that quarantine has just sped up trends that had started long before. In a few years, everyone was already going to be working from home, having everything delivered, and wondering where all the stores went. But now we're doing it ahead of schedule, and no one knows what will happen next. I fear the same happened to my brain. Did I do too much too fast? Have I consumed a year's worth of entertainment in just a few months? Have I become like my 15-year-old students who think movies are too long and who don't even pay attention to the TV shows they kind of watch? At this point in an essay, I'm supposed to come up with an epiphany. That's what makes it a good essay. I'm supposed to show progress or reach some important realizations. I should say I'm going on a media fast and sweat it all out like Sinatra and the Man with the Golden Arm, also on Criterion. But I'm not, because I don't know what to do. I don't know how to turn a movie or a book back into a treat instead of a retreat from trauma, grief, and fear. Maybe this new podcast about mindfulness and meditation will tell me. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Richard. I appreciate that. It's very interesting to look back. I often think, am I going to remember what this was like? And I think it's wonderful that you've, written that up because for yourself. And I think it'd probably be a good thing for all of us to do, just to try to remember what this was like. Next, we'll hear from Amy Long. Amy is the author of Codependence, which was published in 2019. And that book was chosen by Brian Blanchfield as the winner of the Cleveland State University Poetry Center's 2018 essay collection competition. She is a contributing editor to the drug history blog Points and runs the Instagram account at Taylor Swift as Books. Her work has appeared in Diagram, Harper's Ferry Review, Ninth Letter, and elsewhere, including as a notable essay in the Best American Essays of 2019. Amy?
I'm going to read the first essay in Codependence. It's called Relapse. You'll get it in a second. I tell my mother that I've started taking opioids again. Not the way I took them last time, I say. When I say last time, I mean the time she knows about. The time when I wasn't 18 and 19. The time when I wasn't taking them for fun. When I say last time, I mean the 5 years during which I buried my headaches under fistfuls of round blue oxycodone pills, 300 milligrams every day. It won't be like last time, I promise, when she starts crying and I start crying. And for a minute, I think she really means it when she says, "You can do what you want, but you're on your own. I can't go through that again." When she says that again, she means the way I scurried around New York, scavenging pharmacies for the kind and number of pills I needed. She's talking about the death rattle in my voice when I couldn't find them. When she says that again, she means the 8 months I spent on Suboxone and the 4 weeks I spent detoxing in the bed where she doesn't sleep anymore, in the house where she no longer lives. When her mother died, my mother stayed in bed for 9 years. She lay on top of the covers and stared at the TV without really watching. She wore loose-fitting house dresses designed for tourists, printed with a white fish that swam in straight lines down to her knees. Sometimes she ran errands in them. She'd make dinner around sunset, but then sit down at the kitchen table and watch my sisters and me eat the pot roast or lemon chicken she rarely touched. When our dad took his plate to the computer and ate in front of his online cribbage match, she moved to the couch and watched CNN until she fell asleep. In the mornings, she hovered by the front door as my sisters and I pulled on our backpacks and headed out to the Jeep we shared. We were 16. Cher says I've been depressed for a long time, my mom told me. I was 25, and she and our father had recently divorced. She'd started seeing a therapist. I thought you'd been depressed since Meemaw died, I said. She paused. You knew that? My sisters and I are triplets. Beth went to med school in Alabama, did her residency in California, and a fellowship at the most prestigious hospital in the country. Chelsea practices law in our hometown. Her office is in the same complex as our dad's insurance agency and a few miles from our mom's new house. We don't call our parents our mom or my dad. We say the mom and the dad. Chelsea eats lunch with the dad every day, but I can't tell whether she or Beth is his favorite. I only know that I am not. When I visit Destin, we'll go out to eat and run into one of the dad's friends. Is this the doctor or the lawyer? The friend will ask. I'm the other one, I say, and I'm joking, but the dad grimaces like he knows I'm right, while I explain that I'm working on a graduate degree in creative writing. After I finished my first master's in women's studies, I got a job with the ACLU in California. The dad worked himself into a rage that could have launched his career as a Fox News host. He said I was a communist and he was a capitalist, and that my working for the ACLU was like taking his head and rubbing it in sand. The dad loves me, but I'm not sure he likes me. Not the way he likes Beth and Chelsea. The mom used to tell me that wasn't true. Of course your father likes you, she'd say. Now she tells me not to worry about it. He doesn't understand people who aren't like him. I'd called the mom earlier that day, but I hadn't mentioned opiates. I don't call her as much as I used to. It feels like lying, talking to her on pills I haven't told her about. If she doesn't know I'm taking opioids again, she won't understand why I need them. She won't know when I tell her I wrote for 6 hours today, that without the opioids, I might have gotten in 45 minutes of chain smoking and deleting sentences. She'll think I'm able to work through my headaches, or they've gotten better, even though I can't, and they haven't. If I call her on one of the days when I won't let myself take any pills, I'll have to explain that I don't really feel like talking, and she'll wonder why I did feel like talking the day before. She asks whether the lidocaine, my pain doctor's wife, injects into myofascial trigger points, relieves my headaches. I can't say that it does, but neither can I say, the Opana he prescribed sure helps though. The mom came with me to my first appointment at the Blacksburg Center for Pain Management. I would start my second year in Virginia Tech's MFA program in a few weeks. She thought the lidocaine treatments sounded promising. I thought the Christian paraphernalia around the office made her more comfortable, convinced her I'd found a good doctor who wouldn't write me opioids. The second time, I went alone. I knew I would leave with a painkiller prescription. I'd planned it all out. I just had to cry a little after Lisa injected me and wonder aloud whether I could endure this pain while I waited for the lidocaine to work, if it did at all. She said her husband had a cancellation and would talk to me if I could wait. I waited. Dr. Piven offered me oxycodone, Dilaudid, or Opana. I pretended I'd never heard of Opana and let him explain oxymorphone to me. Whatever you think is best, I said, and walked out with a prescription for a drug that my junkie ex-boyfriend once described as better than heroin. But when I got home and took one, I only felt the high in my body. I hadn't really taken opioids in a year, and I felt like I should have gotten more out of something that strong. I had to crush the pills and snort them to get any headache relief at all. The mom remembers that I used to crawl into her lap and say, "My head hurts," before I knew the word for what I felt. Our pediatrician told her I was too young for headaches. When I was 9, he blamed the pain on my personality. I was high-strung with tinfoil nerves. In college, I took downers and smoked pot, and the headaches receded, or maybe I just forgot them. They reemerged the October after I moved to Santa Cruz. I was taking meeting minutes when a tingling pain calcified behind my eyes. "Does anyone have a Tylenol or morphine or something?" I said as we trickled out of the conference room. Ophelia gave me an Excedrin migraine. The pain broke through it within 30 minutes. Brenda suggested I go to the ER. I felt ridiculous going to an emergency room for a headache, but I didn't know what else to do. I didn't have a doctor in California yet. The doctor I saw gave me 11 7.5 milligram Vicodin. I took 2 and called the office. "I can come back," I told Brenda. She called me crazy. "Go home," she said. "Get some rest." I drove to my apartment in the mountains, curled up on the carpet, and took more Vicodin. I thought I'd save the rest, keep them around, and get high a few times. But the migraine lasted 7 days. I took all the pills and had the ER doctor call me in a refill. A month later, it happened again. In February, I got laid off and put on painkillers full time. By the time I left California to take a new job in DC, I developed daily headaches, biweekly migraines, and a dependence on butalbital mixed with codeine. When I tell people I'm taking opioids again, I say, I thought about it a lot. It wasn't an easy decision. But I had already decided I wanted my opiates back before I walked into Piven's office, and I didn't think so much as I worried about it. I still worry about it. I worry that when I leave Blacksburg, I won't find a doctor to replace the one who writes my opioids now. I worry about the way I've yoked myself to a class of drugs so heavily scrutinized that some physicians refuse to dispense them at all, let alone to neurotic 30-year-old women who complain of invisible pain in their heads. I worry about whether I can make my prescription last the month that it's supposed to. I worry about my tolerance. I worry that eventually I'll require such a high dose just to make it through a regular day that I won't have the extra pills I need in order to write. I make contingency plans in my head. If I can't find another doctor, I tell myself, I'll find a methadone clinic. I'll do heroin. I'll buy pills from dealers. I'll be okay. But I don't know that. I'll only know that if something goes wrong, and I worry that it will. I don't tell the mom about the Opana. I tell her I've been taking oxycodone for about 2 weeks. Really, I spent 3 weeks snorting oxymorphone and then asked Piven to switch me down to oxycodone. I've been taking opioids again for a month when I tell the mom about them. I want to tell her while the pharmacist at Kroger refills my anti-anxiety pills, but I'm in public and I know I'll cry when I do. I only called because it had been so long. I just wanted to say hi, check in. I don't need to call the mom again, except that by the time the bus drops me off a block from my house, I'm crying in that silent way that's more like choking because I've deceived the mom and I know how much I'm about to disappoint her. I try to explain why it's different now. I'm taking less in one day than I used to take in a pill, I say. She's not soothed. I get off the phone and feel worse. The mom is upset, maybe with me, maybe for me, maybe both, and probably more. And I can't do anything about it. She says she trusts me and that she's just worried. I say, I know. I'm scared too. The mom says she isn't disappointed in me. She understands. I tell her I'm sorry anyway. The mom got a new bed when she moved out of her old house. So the bed I slept in when I last saw the mom was not the bed in which she lay depressed for a decade. It was not the bed in which I lay sweating and chattering my teeth and moaning about the pain in my stomach and my bones 2 years before I started taking opioids again. It was not the bed to which the mom brought soup and ice cream because they were the only things I could eat in withdrawal. When I wanted real food, she ordered me thin crust Pizza Hut pizzas without cheese and let me eat them on sheets she didn't wash for 2 weeks because she knew that standing made me want to vomit. I hit week 3 and moved upstairs to Chelsea's old bed. I read Joyce Carol Oates and Barry Hannah and Amy Hempel's collected stories and all of Infinite Jest in the same rapacious, irritated way I binge watched 6 seasons of True Blood and 2 of Grey's Anatomy and the entire run of Weeds in the mom's bed. When I held a book, my arm muscles twitched and quivered, and I'd wake up sore from wrist to wrist. I tried to write, but I couldn't sit up to type without feeling nauseated and feverish. I would leave for Virginia in a week, and I still wasn't strong enough to do anything but shuffle around the mom's house, in and out of beds in which no one sleeps anymore. I used to call the mom's old house, our house, but the dad abandoned his claim on it when he left with nothing but his clothes. He moved into a furnished condo on the Destin Harbor, the opposite of the big house on the Choctawhatchee Bay that my mom dictated to an architect when my sisters and I were in 3rd grade. She filled it with junk shop antiques and the furniture we inherited from the dad's grandmother. He didn't want any of that, nothing from his old life. The only thing he's asked for since he moved out is the Kinks box set that Beth, Chelsea, and I gave him on the last Christmas the parents spent together. I saw it sitting beside the mom's new front door when I rolled my suitcase in from the airport last summer. He didn't even want his Kinks box set, I asked. Usually, when the dad opens a present, he says, it's a nice tie, or a nice book. You can tell he's underwhelmed. But after he opened the box set, I took a video of the dad running his finger over the picture book track list and singing the first few lines of 138 Kinks songs. The mom said he'd called to ask if I could bring it to him when we met for dinner on Thursday. I'm hauling around 20 years of a life, and he walks away with some soups and CDs, she said. I didn't tell her it hurt my feelings that he hadn't missed the box set sooner. The first time a guy broke up with me, the mom took me into the closet under the stairs where she kept her records. We sat cross-legged on the carpet and flipped through Harry Chapin and Bob Dylan, Graham Parsons and Hank Williams, the Doors, the Beatles, the Rolling Stones. All the cheesy ones are your dad's, the mom said as she passed over Rod Stewart and pulled out a stack of Emmylou Harris albums. I always listened to her when I was sad, she told me. I took the records up to my room and listened to Luxury Liner first because the mom said it was her favorite. I put on Quarter Moon and a 10-Cent Town because I liked the title, and then Elite Hotel because Emmylou looked so cool and tough on the cover. I listened for echoes of the mom's sadness and of my own. I imagined my mother at 16, horizontal beside a record player, in the suede miniskirt I keep in my closet now, and the lace-up boots whose soles I broke when I tried to move them to New York. I understood then that my mom had invited me to know her in a way she'd never done before. I'm sure she also gave me advice and told me I'd feel better with time, but I only remember the way she handed me those records and inducted me into a fellowship of broken-hearted women. When we talk about opioids, we talk about a heartbreak more cutting than any a lover could inflict. The words we use with men are bloodless compared to the empathy and fury The mom and I yell over each other on the days when she's sick of hearing about my pills and I'm sick of other people interfering in my health. We have our own language for it, but we can't teach it to you. Our fellowship is too exclusive. The cost of entry too high. Done.
Wow. Thank you very much, Amy. Thanks for reading that. Thanks for sharing.
Of course, thank you.
Next, we have Brian Phillip Whalen and his first book, and we're celebrating with him tonight. Brian's work can be found in the Southern Review, Creative Nonfiction, Copper Nickel, and the Flash Nonfiction Food Anthology, and many other places. Brian holds a PhD from the State University of New York at Albany and is a recipient of a Vermont Studio Center residency. He lives with his wife and daughter in Tuscaloosa, where he teaches creative and first-year writing at the University of Alabama. This is his first book. Brian?
Thank you so much. Thank you, Amy, for that wonderful reading, and Richard for your wonderful essay. And thank you to Malvern Books for having us. This is terrific. I wish we could be in one room together, but then you wouldn't get the pleasure of being far too intimate with my beard. So you would be, sitting in the audience. Okay, so I'm going to read. I'm going to read just 3 shorts from the book. I'm going to read off of the computer because it's easier for me on Zoom. But here's the, I got my little copy here. The book consists of mainly microfictions and flash fiction. There's a handful, just a few longer stories. One of those I'm going to read tonight, and you will see that it's still not very long. So if you like short little things, you might enjoy reading this book that is filled with many little stories. Okay, and then I will read 2 of the much shorter stories too. Okay, this one is called No Tango, which in Spanish means I don't have. I flew to Paris with my girlfriend. We stayed at a cheap hotel at the edge of the red light district. Our concierge warned us not to stand too close to doorways. A criminal might pull us inside. It was a strange thing to say, but I paid attention. On our last night in the city, we ate dinner at a cafe a few blocks from our hotel. The waitress was the owner and the chef her husband. The walls were decked in reds and greens, the tables made of solid oak. I'd never eaten escargot. It was delicious. My girlfriend, who'd been to Paris many times, ordered us a bottle of white, then a bottle of red. When the bill came, I was a little unsteady, but it was the waitress who fumbled with the handheld credit card reader. It would not operate, she said, more or less in broken English. Her husband emerged from the kitchen, his forearms decorated with miniature wheels of cut chive. He too fumbled with the machine. He shook it and checked the batteries. My girlfriend found the whole thing funny. Her bare toes crawling up my leg underneath the table, her neck and chest flush. Can you bill our room? I asked, my pulse quickening. I pointed toward the door. The waitress clapped her hands, looking pleased. Addressing her husband in French, she disappeared into the kitchen. The chef retrieved my coat from the rack. The waitress came back with a bottle of Chianti, filling my girlfriend's glass. My girlfriend, laughing, flashed her thigh beneath her skirt, raising her glass to toast me out the door. It was raining. I got to adjust here, sorry, my screen. I followed the chef, who wore no coat and spoke no English. The night was cold and dark, and I could feel the warm wine inside me. The chef was heading in the wrong direction. Oops, hang on one more second. I'm having Zoom bumbles. I just skipped ahead. Okay, the chef was heading in the wrong direction, but I followed him. I walked cautiously in the street while he sought cover from the rain on sidewalks under awnings. He eyed me queerly as the rain soaked my coat. I tried to explain about doorways, the concierge, murder. It was only when I uttered Puerto on a whim that we discovered both he and I spoke Spanish, just a little bit. I told him, more or less, what the concierge said, and the chef wrapped his hands around his throat, letting his tongue roll out. I went ahead and joined him on the sidewalk. We awning hopped for several blocks until we found an ATM. I typed my password incorrectly. My hands were wet and the buttons were slippery. My card slid out without any cash, and the chef, watching over my shoulder, frowned. He began to walk off. I forgot the word accidente, so I called out, "Por favor, tengo dinero." Just then, a tall man in a dark coat emerged from the shadows. I typed my password correctly, and a menu appeared on the screen. But the tall man in the dark coat was heading our way, moving quickly in the rain. I canceled my transaction, stepping out from under the awning. The man was in line behind the chef, and I motioned for him to go before me. The chef gestured for us to head back, but I touched his arm and said softly, "Un momento." I didn't think he understood. I thought about wringing my neck or lolling my tongue out. I felt embarrassed and queasy. I waited with the chef in the rain as the tall man used the ATM. By then, the rain had washed all of the herbs off of the chef's arm, and my coat was drenched. I pulled its collar to my throat while the chef resumed conversation. "How long?" he asked. "Had my wife and I been married?" In correcting him, I tried to find the words to tell him that my girlfriend and I were in college, and that after graduation, we planned to move to New York City, where we'd get jobs and earn money and be happy, and no matter what happened, we would have each other always. He did not seem to understand, but he smiled every time I said amor. He asked me how old we were. I said 21 years old, and he burst into laughter. The tall man in the dark coat, having finished his transaction, joined us in the street. He said something in French to the chef, and the chef, pointing to my chest, said something back. Both men burst into laughter. Speaking rapidly, as if they were old friends, the two men conversed with joy. I stood there watching as their mouths contorted into wild smiles in the dim, foggy streetlight. The rain did not let up. There were no red lights in this neighborhood. Everyone was a liar and a fraud. I stepped to the ATM and slid my card in the slot. Behind me, the men carried on, laughing and causing a stir. I selected English from the menu, but when prompted, I put in random numbers. When my card slid out, I acted surprised. I slid it in again, punched another set of random numbers. I stood to the side so the chef could see my movements. My hands were cold and shaking. I repeated the routine a few more times. By then, the laughter had stopped and the tall man walked off. The chef, sopping wet, turned up his palms. "No tango," I said, and put my card in my wallet. His wife could bill our room. To hell with paying him cash. We headed back the direction we'd come, and the chef, still smiling, asked me more questions, but I pretended I did not understand. I had this feeling. I could not shake the image of my girlfriend, drunk back in his cafe, or cafes like it, in Paris or Manhattan, her skin flush, her eyes inviting. I thought ahead to later that night in our room, the way she'd look at herself in the mirror while letting her hair down, how she'd pull me close as we fell into bed. And as I walked with the chef in the rain, I knew in my heart that I'd take her, but that she wasn't mine. All right, so that was No Tango. It's a different thing. I'm totally used to in class when I teach, like dropping the book that I'm reading from and trying to pick it up and throwing my back out when I pick it up. But it's a new thing to suddenly hit the wrong button on a PDF and you're on like page 90 when you want to be on page 12. So that was fun. Okay, this next piece is called Exposure. And I told Becky I was going to read from a story in which I did not know how to pronounce one of the words in the story. And this is the story. I'm going to say it's daguerreotype, and somebody can correct me in the Q&A. All you need to know is that at the end, when I mentioned daguerreotype, it's a very old-fashioned form of photography. I think it might actually be the first form of photography, and it was used for, or at least the first form of photography for like portraits. It was used just to take pictures of people, and it would come, you've probably seen them, but it would come in like an actual piece of copper behind glass. And the thing you need to know is it just took a really long time to develop. So you'd have to pose for a long time holding still, and then it would take a long time for it to develop too. Okay, so that's going to come up in the story. All right, so this is called exposure. Her junior year of high school, my sister won a contest for best photograph. The way the story goes, it was a Sunday morning in Moscow. She'd been hiding under the ledge of a third-story window, kneeling beside Gabriel Bowden, another exchange student, while the two of them threw hunks of stale bread at the old women walking home from church. Bored, my sister followed one of the women to a neighborhood park, a quiet spot with tree-lined fields. The woman, not 10 yards ahead on the path, stopped dead in her tracks. Her back to my sister, she stared into space, standing perfectly still, a living statue. There was no discernible reason. She stood there a very long time. My sister, who brought her camera everywhere, took a picture. When she turned 30 years old, my parents got my sister a digital camera. We had not seen her in a while, and she wasn't staying long. She was between programs again, which meant another relapse was just around the corner. But still, my parents hoped the camera would inspire her, maybe to take a family photo, or shots of the river and the mountains, maybe even think about returning to college. But my sister only took one photograph, a blurry image composed of the dog's nose, the corner of the coffee table, and a crooked expanse of hardwood floor. She'd been trying to adjust the zoom when her finger brushed against the shutter button. "Thanks anyway," she said, excusing herself to the guest room. My mother placed the camera on the mantle where it remained untouched. 2 centuries ago, when daguerreotypes were new, it took 15 minutes to pose for a photograph. Our ancestors had faith in transformation, abiding in stillness, the expensive time it took to translate flesh and blood onto a plate of silvered copper. When loved ones passed on, those left behind could look to those images, keepsakes of the dead, sources of light in the darkness. But tell me, how do we recover living ghosts? How dark must it be to see their fading light? All right, so that is exposure. I brought a prop to this to go along with exposure, which probably will glare. Oh, you can almost see maybe through the screen. The actual photograph that this story was based on, taken by my sister quite a long time ago. Okay, I've got one more for you. Let me go here. I've got to get to it. Scroll down in the book. So this one is another word that I'm not 100% sure how to pronounce. This one I did my homework. And when I say homework, I meant I Googled it. And I listened to several different YouTube pronunciations, and they were all different. So I figured that gives me carte blanche just to go with, my own hybrid. It is a Portuguese word, Brazilian Portuguese, that I came across when in my mid-20s when I was reading Mario de Andrade and his beautiful book of poetry called Hallucinated City. He was a modernist. It was wonderful. Nobody really knows about him. I got a kick out of it when I came across de Andrade in the library, because my mother used to make references to Mario Andretti, the NASCAR driver. And when I was learning to drive, she would say, "Slow down, who do you think you are, Mario Andretti?" And then it was Mario de Andrade, and I always got a kick out of that. The word is saudade or saudade, saudade, one of those. I've heard all three. And all you really need to know is that the word means an intense longing or nostalgia for something that is lost. It gets more complicated. It can't really translate 100% to the English language, because it's also a longing or a nostalgia where you feel like there might be a hope for restoration or a hope for a reunion, but that hope is impossible, like we often feel with somebody who has passed on, or a place that we have been to that we can no longer visit. something like that. So this is called Sabdata. It is told just in a series of tiny little, like 1 or 2 sentence mini stories that amount to the whole piece. So I'll end with this one. In one dream, I do not recognize my sister when I pass her on the street. I wake at 3 a.m. as the dog leaps out of bed, a dash to the kitchen, a violent lapping at his water dish, as if he'd traveled far in his dreams, thousands of miles, an Odyssean journey, and he just then, at that very moment, at long last, reached home. This happens nightly. My mother told me that when her father got drunk, he stripped naked and slept in the yard. When my sister got high, she'd sit in our parents' basement eating almonds and watching Blind Date on TV. My challah bread doughs, 7 of them, were too wet. The crusts kept burning before the insides cooked through. You would think I'd have learned over time. If not that, then something. I told Jordan I had a dream my daughter was missing. Jordan said he'd also had a dream. In his dream, he was trying to feed his infant son a 3-foot wide hamburger bun. My sister, before she died, had a conspiracy theory about the band NSYNC. They were robots, she claimed. Their names were the clue. Timberlake had a smooth, pure timbre. Joey Fatone was the fat one. Lance Bass sang bass. I asked her, well, what about J.C. Chazes and Chris Kirkpatrick? Oh, they were real, she said, but they were in on it. That's Sabdata. Thank you all so much.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Those were great. I have to say that that warning about getting pulled into the doorways, because be careful of doorways because murderers would be there and grab you. It reminded me, I've had a flashback back to I used to travel a lot on business, and there was one particular time that my boss and she and I were sharing a room at this Best Western because there weren't many rooms available. And they had the bellboy, who was a man of about probably 65 or 70, help us carry our luggage to our room. And one of the things that he was going to do for us was check the room out. So what he did was he comes into the room and he lays on the floor and looks under the beds for us. We couldn't stop laughing because we kept saying, my gosh, does it happen often that he finds someone under there? And it reminded me of being pulled into the doorways, people being killed. It's like, how often does that really happen?
So, never, but he's going to be the one who discovers it, right? He's not taking anything for chance. Yeah.
Exactly. Now let's see. So Phoebe, the wonderful Phoebe from Ospress, she does have a great question for us. And she asked if each of you could tell us one of the best pieces of writing advice that you've ever received, if you could share that. So I don't know who would like to go first on that.
Richard, since you read first, or Amy, you kind of flashed your hand up, either of you.
I can. I have one. I know mine. If everyone else needs time to think. The first is there's no such thing as writing, only editing, which I heard from my women's studies MA advisor, and who's now just my friend. And it sort of helps you like get through that like shitty first draft thing better than the shitty first draft, like because you know that you can go back and edit it later. But my favorite was from Matthew Vollmer in a creative nonfiction class. That is what sort of made me abandon fiction and go for creative nonfiction. Is to write what you're obsessed with. No matter what it is, even if no one else gives a shit about it. And so I've been, that's sort of like my, what I have, like when I want to like brainstorm or whatever, I think about like, well, what have you been watching? What have you been listening to? What have you been thinking about? And, it doesn't work that well with students though. It's weird. It's like young people don't have interests. It's strange. I always tell them, I hope that someday they'll say that this is their favorite piece of advice. I always tell them, you'll be more interesting people if you have interests.
Thank you. Richard, Brian?
Yeah, that was great. That's great advice and an interesting observation of young people. You may be onto something there. When I was at I got my MFA from Texas State, and Tim O'Brien was one of my professors there, like Tim O'Brien. And I remember sending him the first few chapters of my novel, and one chapter in particular, I was like, I knew in my head it was like the greatest thing anyone had ever written. It was these two characters, they're meeting, they're really like, I looked at the chapter, I'd revised it a ton of times, and I was like, this is good because they're really, the reader gets a window onto the world. The reader really gets to understand who these two guys are and like what they care about, and it's important. And they're coming together, they're having some coffee. I knew I had to make them do stuff, so they're having coffee and lots of talking. I was really proud of that chapter, and he shredded my entire manuscript in a way that is almost impressive, and it's like precision and cruelty, 100% right about everything he said. And like the one note on those like few pages was, the only thing that happens in this chapter is coffee, and that was it. And that was enough. It was just like shredding of notes, a few pages of nothing, and just that one note really got like the message across. You got to have your characters do stuff. It has to move the story forward, while also painting the picture, letting us know who they are, and so on and so forth. So yeah, I think about that one all the time.
That's great.
I think so. When you were talking about, following your obsessions, right, and things like that, I tell my students that too. I steal from, well, I don't steal from it because I cite it when I tell them, but there's a great introduction to a collection of stories or essays, and I don't even know what collection it's from, but it's Annie Dillard, and it's called Notes to Young Writers, and I give it to every class of mine at the beginning of every semester. And the one bit in there that is the best advice I've read about writing is Annie Dillard says to follow your own weirdness, which I think is just kind of a wonderful thing. The best advice I ever got, I think, it kind of was the same bit of advice, but from two different people. Lynn Tillman, once when I was just having a hard time with writing and thinking about publishing, and just, as writers, we also have to live our lives, right? We forget that sometimes. And she just said, matter of factly, she said, good writing takes time. And that was it, right? And then my other advisor, he did not mean this for writing, it was for other things, but my other advisor, Ed Schwarzschild, who was directed my PhD, he, sorry, not the PhD, he directed my dissertation. He would always tell me anytime I was getting anxious or ahead of myself, he'd say, no news is no news. And the motto, it was mostly for like waiting to hear back from like job interviews and like waiting to hear back from sending your work out. So he probably doesn't even know that I think about it when I actually write, but in that slow process of just like building a manuscript or working on a story, when, like Amy had said, right, when you're not writing, you're rewriting. It's just time and it's a lot of work. And when you're doing that, nobody is like singing your praises about what you're writing. Nobody's publishing it. You can get too far ahead. And so I like to kind of remind myself, no news is no news, right? Now it's just the writing. Like, don't let the noise kind of interfere. It still interferes, but it helps to keep it at bay.
That's good. I like that. I might steal that.
Yeah, that's good advice too. Just for everything.
For anything, yeah. No, it's right. No news is no news.
Right? That's right. Let's see. So there is another one about. Let's see, Richard, did you tell Tim that chapter was your homage to Seinfeld? Show about nothing?
Chapter about nothing.
I would say that in workshops, sometimes people would almost try that defense, and it never worked. It never went well. Never.
So
But I
Richard,
posted that next question because I always love to hear about writers like routines. So like Brian and Amy, like your routines, like what are they?
Brian, who wants to go first?
You can go for it, Amy. Yeah.
Hi. Well, it kind of, my routine depends on how my pain management is. When I was in grad school and I had good pain management, I would teach on Mondays and Wednesdays or Tuesdays and Thursdays, and my classes always got out around 11 or noon. And so I would go home, I would take my like after class pill, and I would write until like at least 6 o'clock, like 6 p.m. So like noon to 6. And it was wonderful and I loved it. And now my pain management is terrible. And I'm lucky if I can get in this one specific 3-hour time period. And I always feel like I'm just getting into it when my head is too pained to continue thinking. So it's like, it's not the best, but we're working on that. So my routine is to try to write in like big chunks. And that's how I do best. Like if I can just sort of like focus on it all day, no distractions, except that I like to have music playing in another room so that it's like background, but not like I can still hear it, but it's not like right in my face,
and is it music with words, or do you
Yes.
does it make you want to sing along and get kind of too distracted?
I mean, it doesn't make me distracted. I think because like I make these huge playlists, like I'll do like every song Tori Amos has ever put out, or like my like neo folk playlist, or like my Taylor Swift playlist. And it just kind of like goes on in the background. And usually there's songs I know so well that I don't need to listen to them. And it's just kind of like momentum, I guess.
Yeah.
I know that a lot of people have trouble writing to lyrics.
Yeah. And Brian?
Yeah, so interesting. With your long chunks, because mine is, and some of this is just sort of out of necessity and maybe age. I used to write in like marathon sittings, all night long. And I would think I'm like Bukowski, except I wasn't drinking, and just write until, I pass out from exhaustion, where he would kind of collapse in the keyboard because he just drank, 2 6-packs all night long. Probably more than that.
That's it. I was gonna say.
Yeah, two is a little wrong. Now I kind of steal away moments. So I had a daughter. My daughter's 5 years old, and for the first 2.5 years of her life, I was the stay-at-home dad, and then I taught at night when my wife worked all day long. And it just completely upheaved any sense of freedom with writing. And I found 2 things happen. One was that I just kind of would steal away and got really good at being able to, like, I don't want to say write well, that sounds wrong, but like write what I wanted to do, like get something accomplished in like 15 or 20-minute bursts. And then also, now a lot of the stories in this collection had already been written and are small, but all the other stuff I've been working on since my daughter was born are like prose poems and like micro essays and this little form that I kind of had to squeeze in. It makes me think too, if I wanted to have like a real nice literary moment, I remember reading Gertrude Stein because she was such a socialite. Rarely had more than like 15 minutes a day to write. But she said that 15 minutes a day over the course of a year or several years can amount to a lot of pages. And so I kind of take heart in a sense that, this little chip away.
This is very helpful to me. I'm going to need to study you.
Well, it's not fun when your 15 minutes is a really lousy 15 minutes. I'll say that. If you have 8 hours and 4 of them suck, but the other 4 are great, right? You can lean into it. When you have that stretch of days where you've got 1 at bat and you're just whiffing.
Yep.
It can be depressing. Richard, can we ask, will you tell us your routine? And you mentioned you're a father. Has your routine changed at all since then?
No, if you consider that before I was a father, I was a high school teacher, which meant I didn't have a routine and just barely got to write. I mean, one thing that I have noticed myself doing with like essays or any kind of nonfiction is just holding them in my head for a long time and then like days and just kind of rearranging things because I don't have time. And then sitting down and just and you know, draft needs a lot of work after that, but it's better than if I had, I think, I guess, I don't know, but I think it would be better than if I had just sat down a week earlier, or however long, just to try it. So that's new. That's new and interesting for me. But otherwise, it's the stealing away. I've got a day. I've taken myself to a new place for a night. I've got whatever, and then it used to be summer breaks or like in December breaks when I was a teacher, and that's harder now. But you know, if I know this is it, I got 2 days, I got to get something done, then that helps.
So what you guys are saying is that I need to have a baby, and then I'll learn how to write in little short increments.
Or teach high school English.
Yeah.
That'll work too.
I'm so scared of teaching high school. Like college is easy. College, I'm like, okay, we're reading this today. I read it. I think about it for 5 minutes, think of a couple questions. I'm done. I can plan while I'm walking to class. High school teaching, I mean, you have to have lesson plans. And in Florida, I think you have to give them to someone like the state or something. And it just sounds like a bunch of busy work that I know that I would hate and be terrible at. Because I'm better at like the interacting with the kids thing. Also, I curse too much.
I could call
To
you
be a high school teacher.
Well, I think that we're about a little after 8, and so I guess unless there's any other questions from anyone, I think we're going to be kind of tying it up. But I want to just thank y'all so much for joining us and to celebrate with Brian. And Brian, I'm so glad you chose to let us host you on this, because we're thrilled to do it. Phoebe from Aus Press, thanks for contacting us. I hope everyone has enjoyed it. I know I have. And it's been a wonderful evening. And I so appreciate the other readers joining us as well. And thank y'all so much. And if anyone would like any of the books, please contact us at Malvern Books, 512-322-2097. We'd love to work with you. If you have any questions about the books, and we can be happy to send them to you. Even we'll send, because this is an event, we do ship books throughout the US, so we can do that for you too. But if you're in Austin, we'd love to see you at our curbside pickup or for an appointment.